Hello, this is Pick, and welcome back to my developer commentary for Integration by Parts DX presented by FTB. Today will feature a lot of automation, and there's a ton of stuff to discuss, so let's get right into it. The first thing to do is make a farm for corundum, as it's used for infused crystals. It grows in a similar manner to sugarcane, where it has a chance of spawning a new block above it over time. However, it can only do this at low Y levels. I don't recall the exact number, but being at bedrock is good enough. In addition, it will have the chance to grow extra smaller crystals on the sides, though you don't need too many of those. Next on today's agenda is to upgrade my jetpack. It's a fair amount of crafting, but with the newly acquired infused redstonium, a lot opens up, this included. The hardened jetpack is much faster laterally than its leadstone predecessor, but still has some issues with vertical speed. With the amount of infusion ahead, the starter tier energizing rods aren't going to cut it anymore. I can upgrade them and the cables to basic tier, so each will send out 5 times the energy per tick it was doing before. The alternative is to make more rods, but better ones scale faster for resources it takes to make them. I'm running low on storage space, so now is a good time to make a modular storage. It's similar to a watered down version of a refined storage system, or if it has an equivalent to the ME chest, then that. Essentially, you put a storage drive in, and it lets you store 100, 200, or more stacks of items, up to 500 depending on the tier. It comes with a search feature and an internal crafting grid as well, though really I just want it as a bigger barrel. To insert or extract, you need to lock the storage module into the modular storage. It fits nicely into my pre-existing sorting system. Alongside crystals, I can also attune myself to a constellation. After thinking about it, I decide to attune to Dissidia. The attunement you choose will affect both how you level up and what perks are more readily accessible. Visio levels up by running, Avorcio by breaking blocks, Avidus by placing blocks, Armara by taking damage, and Dissidia by dealing damage. Once attuned, you can begin to see minor constellations in the telescope, which opens up a lot more options for what you can do with your crystals. Unfortunately, I just barely didn't have enough time to finish attuning tonight, so I'll have to do that off camera tomorrow night. Now it's time to discuss perks. There are all sorts of perks that do both weird things and just raise player stats. Generally, the stats you get are biased to the constellation you chose. However, the perks are not exclusive other than the root perks, so you can feel free to move towards whatever you want and even run a hybrid build. You only start with 1 perk point, but early leveling goes by fairly fast, so you'll have a few to work with. I plan on going for a berserker style build, so the perks I want will coincide with that. My first special perk is Rampage. This makes it so that I get a speed and attack bonus every time I kill a mob. With my high attack speed and running speed already, this just makes it even more insane. Something to note is that minor stats are all affected by nodes that raise perk effectiveness, so if you want to round out your build with an all-around increase to the stuff you've worked towards, that's a viable option, especially for stuff that can't be raised otherwise. Since I'm buffing myself right now, better armor would be nice. Whether or not it's a good idea, I'd like to go with mana weave robes. Since I now have infusion ready, I can use an alternative method to craft enchanted books. This way it uses different materials and isn't too bad to do most of the time. I'll need 8 recipes to make a Thorns 4 book, as it only makes the first tier, unlike the Starlight Enchanter. However, it requires a resource from the end known as Hydralux petals. They aren't really rare or common. You can find them in the outer pools or in the center chamber of the structures in a sulfur springs biome. The saplings grow underwater, but only on sulfuric rock. The petals need to be enchanted using the crystals I got in the Crystal Mountains, but that's not that expensive given the sheer volume you get. Like I said, the books are rather inexpensive anyway, it just takes a while to make them manually, especially if you want a higher tier. You will need experience to combine them in the anvil, just keep that in mind. I also took a Chain Lightning perk. It activates when I hit enemies, which also counts if Thorns is responsible for the damage. Its only downside is that it kills mobs you don't want dead sometimes, and you also don't get looting drops from it either. Let's fight a wither to test out my new overwhelming strength. Nocturnal powder in a fortress will make it much faster to find some wither skeletons. Somehow this caused the game to crash, but I resumed doing it after the crash and things worked fine, so I don't know what the issue was. I don't think it was the nocturnal powder, if anything it was one of my perks, but I can't tell. It went about as I expected it to. I simply deal too much damage for anything else to matter. Not that the Wither is exceptionally difficult in the first place, mind you. Where I really would like to test things out is in the dimensional dungeons, but I won't be going there for at least a few more episodes. Now it's time for the main event. Industrial Remix is going to require a lot of space, so before I start crafting and laying out machines, I'd like to make some building gadgets to simplify the process. It'll go right underneath the floor. The building gadget is useful for building shapes, the copy-paste gadget copies structures, the exchanging gadget lets you swap blocks out for other blocks, and the destruction gadget can void large areas. They also all have an undo button in case you make a mistake. Real quick, since runes will be handy later, I set up the runic altar. All you need to do is drop the items on, point a mana spreader at it, and finish the craft with a living rock. There are 5 tier 1 runes, 4 tier 2, and 7 tier 3. To complete Industrial Remix, I need 200 bio-enriched circuits. This means 50 electronic circuits, 200 organic diodes, and a whole bunch of other subcrafts from there. This is an automation challenge, so I would definitely recommend at least partial automation if you plan on doing this now. However, if you do it later, the reward might not be as appealing, so it's your decision. To give a visual understanding of what's going on, I've laid out a roadmap on the ground to show what will go where. This isn't perfect, as some steps are going to end up semi-manual, but the main stuff is going to be mostly automatic, which is what I want. To prep, I switched out the spruce trees on the tree beacon for rubberwood trees, as I'll need a fair bit of rubber. This is an extremely simple way of automating the energizing orb, but it only works for single ingredient crafts. Essentially, if the orb has an item in it, the comparator turns the hopper off. Then, when the product is extracted, another one takes its place. There will be a separate setup for multi-item crafting, which I'll get into in a moment. Should you ever want to make a large batch of crystals or crystallized flax seeds, this is the way to do it. To handle more than one item, and this works for any number of crafts, you want hoppers for one less than your total number of ingredients and a number of droppers equal to your number of ingredients. And of course put a comparator and inverter so that everything is hooked up properly. I borrowed this design from VeloFast on YouTube. How it works is it spits out one round of items, all of the items go into the orb, and once it empties, the comparator checks, it signals the droppers to fire the next batch, and it repeats until the system is empty. I'll be using it to make electron tubes. Here you can get a view of the orb automation in action. I routed power from the upper level down into here. I also set up some logistical transporters to keep things running smoothly. The redstonium happens to go into both the carpenter and the electron tubes, so the colors are assorted accordingly to make sure it all makes it where it's supposed to go. Simple circuit assemblies are finally coming in. And with another bunch of components, electronic circuits are automated. While bio-enriched circuits aren't useful beyond this remix, the regular circuits most certainly are. Good for infrastructure. The first few bio-enriched circuits are coming in. This isn't much more interesting than waiting, so of course you don't have to sit here and watch it happen. I assume that there will be more to talk about, but I guess it's just that simple. And there you have it. Industrial Remix is all done. As a reward, I now have a powerful drill and a fairly large capacitor to keep it charged. This drill mines in up to a 7x7 area at a time, but can be configured to mine far less if you so desire. The remix is required to start the final chapters, as are the other 6 remixes scattered across the other chapters. Switching back to Botania, I make a Gourmaryllis. Like the Endo Flames, you drop fuel on the ground to let it generate mana, but this time the fuel is food. Food is entirely dependent on the number of hunger points the food restores, with no mind for saturation. It also has a mechanic where if you feed it different foods it will make extra, but if you only feed it one it won't work. This makes good use of the cooking mechanics that have been implemented. After making the other basic runes and crafting them with some infused lapicium to make a terrestrial agglomeration plate, place the plate down in the center of a checkerboard structure of living rock and lapis and put a spark on it and a mana pool. Sparks quickly transport mana from one location to another, and in this case, with half a pool worth of mana, a mana diamond, mana pearl, and mana steel, they combine to make Terra Steel. Terra Steel is useful for a large number of late game Botania recipes. While we're on the topic of Botania recipes, the tier 2 runes, which are for the seasons, all require various types of tree mantis leaves, which can be made with algatree. To get materials for better mana setups, I'll also need to activate the portal to Alfheim and do some resource trading now that we have Terra Steel to make it. Living Wood turns into Dreamwood, Mana Steel into Elementium, Mana Diamonds into Dragonstone, and Mana Pearls into Pixie Dust. Each has its uses, especially for upgrading your current mana setup. From here, I spent a long time making this food automation building. This is to feed the Gourmaryllis, which as previously stated makes mana from food. It took a very long time to make and there was a lot of mess and figuring things out, so recording it as I was setting it up wasn't an option. You'll get this detailed tour instead. So, what is this monstrosity? Well, despite what it looks like, it's in fact not a spaghetti factory, it's a cupcake factory. That also happens to make buttered baked potatoes. And the walls are made of fish. How lovely an aroma this would have if you could smell it. Since this is so big, I'll try to make the explanation as clear as possible. Power is produced in the separate windmill building. In addition to the titular windmills, I have some thermoelectric generators supplementing the power supply. Thermoelectric generators run off of a temperature difference, so I'm using blue ice and rhenium to make energy. I have also labeled the rhenium so I know whose it is. Now to get to the actual automation. Everything here is derived from 7 raw inputs: potatoes, cocoa, carrots, pumpkins, sugarcane, salt, and milk. The potatoes, carrots, pumpkins, and sugarcane can all be made in garden cloches, laid like this. The garden cloche is a good way of having a compact farm at the cost of some power. I also can insert the bone meal from the bottom if I want to grow the crops faster. The baked potatoes are the simplest, so I'll start there. The potatoes are taken out of the cloche with a logistical sorter, as they are used in 2 different steps and I want to be exporting them in a round-robin fashion. The potatoes are then sent to a furnace to be cooked into baked potatoes, to which the furnace is powered by an exoflame. This mana pool which powers the exoflame is the first target for any mana production on the lower floor, so the system won't shut itself down. One assembler handles all of the potato crafts as they proceed linearly. The only other ingredient is milk, which can be made by the cow in a jar. The buttered baked potatoes are then sent downstairs. If you didn't know, the exoflame powers furnaces that are nearby. Meanwhile, the other furnaces turn sugar into marshmallows and then caramel. Carrots and pumpkins also follow a similar path without being processed. To handle the logistics, I'm sorting all of the logistical transporters by color. You don't have to follow my coloring, but I did end up using almost all of the channels. A cocoa farm bone meals and harvests cocoa beans using item users. Currently, bone meal is not automated, but I'll get around to it eventually, hopefully. Perhaps when I gain access to routing nodes. Cocoa and potatoes are put into these precision droppers, which have an offset of 2 blocks to ensure the items enter the chamber without flying out. Block placers deploy the anvils, and the breakers retrieve them, while transporters complete the loop. The flour and cocoa powder are picked up by the hopper hawk and put into each filtered chest. Hopper hawks can be filtered by placing item frames in their target inventories, and this one is linked to an empty mana pool to stop it from borrowing from the other one that has mana in it. Should it have mana, the hopper hawk's range is much larger. Comparators read the chests and ensure the system turns off if there's too much. Cocoa then joins its flavor buddies on the way to cupcake production. Salt is farmed using a harvester, as the harvester doesn't require replanting of seeds. A vacuum hopper picks up the salt essence, which is then sent to the crafty crate to make salt. The crate has a 2x2 pattern put on it so that it automatically makes 16 salt every time it receives 4 salt essence. I might increase its growth ticks another time. Salt and flour are then sent to the precision droppers, which are set on a redstone clock. Flour is made and picked up by the petite hopper hawk, which has a much smaller range than its big brother. I missed the configurable range of the range collector from actually additions, but this will have to do. All of these redstone relays are effectively channeled signals that greatly simplify inputs and outputs. You can make them share a line if they all have different colors, but more on that later. Sugarcane is also centrifuged to make sugar, and the centrifuge runs on wind power, but the Feed the Beast Industrial Contraptions version. The sugar is then sent to the cupcake crafting setup as well. Finally, all the ingredients combine in the precision droppers, which release in proportional amounts to make one of each flavor of cupcake per batch. The cooking plate is kept warm by an ignition lens from a collector crystal outside, and an item user repeatedly uses a glass bottle on it to make the hot air. The vacuum hopper then picks up the cupcakes, and finally we can go downstairs. All the food items are stored in drawers and sorted out into droppers using pretty pipes. They're then activated on this complex redstone setup. In simplest terms, there are 8 possible outputs for the 2 animated redstone torches. Animated torches only emit redstone in one direction and can be toggled by a hovering hourglass. They can either flip 180 degrees or 90 degrees depending on the setting. With the hourglasses synchronized using 1 red sand in one and 4 red sand in the other, all the redstone is sent to the various connector inputs. These then link to the logic pieces, which are only set to emit redstone under AND logic. AND logic is when both side inputs are powered, AND meaning both. The reason for 8 states and 5 foods is that it takes longer for the Gourmaryllis to digest the potato, so it gets extra time, and also making a 5 state from base 2 is either impossible or above my pay grade. All of this is for a 1.6 efficiency bonus. I found it fun to make this system though, even if it was extremely painful and took 4 days to finish. So, I know things are a bit abrupt to end on this episode, and it's a day late because of all that setup, but hopefully I'll be able to get back on schedule. So thanks for watching, this has been Pick, I'm glad to have seen you, and I hope to see you again.